Hello and welcome to today's session on best practices around plant project data management. My name is Emmanuel Maenda. I'm a technical sales specialist. Today's agenda is going to cover 4 topics: spec-driven workflow, leveraging the P&ID painter, and then discussion on the new Plant 3D P&ID modeler, and then finalize that on best practices on how to perform data validation. So let's get started. So traditionally, if you work in a P&ID or a Plant 3D project, you need to have P&ID drawings corresponding to the related 3D modeling part of it. This involves you working from a P&ID line lists window that displays all the line elements and the segments and basically the associated fittings, the valves, and the inline components in a drawing. Then from that line list, you have to select any available P&ID object and place its mapped Plant 3D counterpart in the Plant 3D model. These property values of the P&ID object become copied onto the Plant 3D object model. This spec-driven workflow in Plant 3D allows you as a designer to reference this plant information, so from the Plant 3D spec files, while you're drafting your piping and instrumentation diagrams. This workflow really helps you to identify the objects that are in spec and the objects that are out of spec. Let us jump into the software and see how to go about that. So we can start inside of my custom Plant 3D project that has a set of P&ID drawings that are abstract by nature. It's just for demonstration purposes. And then I also have 3D drawings which are going to use from at a later stage after we are done with this exercise. Now when you go to your project, you'll notice that going to your project, you'll notice that we have a set of symbols that we've added here. And I've also went ahead and created a custom spec that has a couple of parts already preloaded and added onto the project. Now, this is where spec-driven workflow comes in handy, because anything that is not in the project spec or in my company spec will be eventually highlighted, and this now serves as a data flag. So for this to happen, we have to make sure that our project, on the project setup dialog box, that our project is not just a standard project, and just turn this option to be on as a spec-driven project. What this happens, once you do this for the first time, you'll notice that you are, from your tool palettes, if you're using the correct workspace, your tool palettes will now look in a different have a different kind of a look. Now, when I look at this, when I look at my drawings, it doesn't really look as if there is anything to worry about. But just for safety purposes and consistency purposes, I'm just gonna make sure that on my P&ID painter settings, once I have this option set to be spec driven, automatically this option on your P&ID painter settings comes up correctly. Now, this allows me to maybe select some display sets for certain criteria, like in this case, something that is off spec to be highlighted as red, and the ones that are in spec, I can also give it another different color, like say magenta. So when I hit apply and then I click OK, it won't change automatically, because I'll still need to go to this on the P&ID painter panel on the ribbon, making sure that you have your workspace correctly, because I'm using the PIP standard. So with PIP, with the PIP workspace, I have the P&ID painter on. So once I click on it, you can see the ones that are in spec highlighted as magenta. The ones that are out of spec highlighted as red. So you see here, going by my settings again, project setup, and you will see that the ones that are in spec and the ones that are off spec highlighted as red. So I can do a quick so just performing a simple validation, because I just added these as gate valves, globe valves into my spec, and you'll see these already being highlighted as the ones that are in spec. Now, please note that this painting option, this P&ID painting option, is only visible when you want to print it or when you want to convert this drawing to a PDF. It is not available when you want to export your drawing into AutoCAD, because these related settings are inside the database. So when you perform that option of exporting to AutoCAD, these colors will not get exported. It is also worth noting that your tool palette might display symbols here that, yes, they are being highlighted, but this actually shows me that they are not part of the project. And there's also some other instances that you might have parts loaded onto your spec, but the specific sizes are not part of your spec. I'll give an example on my spec viewer. So let us look at the spec viewer for my custom spec here. I have a valve that is a needle valve that is a size range between 15 millimeters 25. So that's about half inch to about 1 inch. So what happens if I add a needle valve that is, let's say, 50? So that's if I add a 50 needle valve, you'll see that it's not in the spec. But if I add another, let's say another needle valve here, you can see that it shows up as so. So this actually tells me that this part is part of the spec. Now, there could be some instances that you're adding something that is not in the spec at all. So for example, if it is this pinch valve, as you can see from the spec viewer, that it's not there. So even when you add it, it's not going to be, yes, it's going to be added, but then it's not going to be given any color. So this actually tells you that it's absolutely not part of the spec. So something very important that you need to something important worth noting, that these are the different sort of behaviors when you apply the P&ID painter and setting up all those setting up the rules. One other application of the P&ID painter is giving another display configuration for P&ID painting by, let's say, the line service. So simply going to your project setup, and then I am going to my P&ID painter settings, and then you can see colors by size. So now here I can select the color accordingly, as well as if I need something else of that sort, I can just go ahead and do that. So make sure that I color by size, and you can see all these pre-made configurations, which you can obviously change. So color by size, then I click OK. And when I go to P&ID, you will see that this actually changes. We can look into another example where is a ACC project. We can see the other application, which is color by service. And under my P&ID printer settings, I can see that I have a couple of services here. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make sure that I have my service set up by a specific service like relief vent. You can see relief vent, which is another color, which is gonna give it another color here, which is orange. And I have steam condensate, and I also have a boiler blowdown, which is BD. Bravo Delta, which is, I'm just going to give it a color with something like that. And once I click apply, upload it to ACC. This is where we get, so click OK. Going back to my project and change my paint PID, you should be able to see that my drawing now displays the color as should. Additionally, you can also maybe do some basic edits for some of the default line colors for your P&ID object. This can be controlled again from the project setup dialog box. In some other instances, it's also controlled by the type of template that you are using. You could be using the out-of-the-box AutoCAD Plant 3D P&ID, also be using your own. And this is just an example of how to go about it. So you can either go to your project setup. Under project setup, what I want to do is I just want to change those lines to from a blue line to a white line. And under my P&ID class definition, you navigate to your lines, pipeline segments, primary line segment. As an example, I'm going to click on edit line, and you'll see that I have an option here of changing the color to white. Probably need to change that very heavy line weight to something like 0.20. Click OK, click apply, and then you click OK. Then immediately it just shows up. It just shows up like this. Ideally, the other way you could easily manage this as a suggestion is editing the template itself. When you start a new drawing, for example, in this instance, when I click on a new drawing, you'll see that this is the template that it actually points out to. This could be the template that I want, or I can also choose any other template that is actually stored in my project or in my folder or on ACC. For you, it could be your own company template, or if you just want to use this default template. So one of the ways that I find useful here is opening up the template itself. And then, for example, the PID ISO A1, click on open. And then when I go to the, just go to my layer property manager, you will see that I have a couple of this colors here, the names of the layers that I can optionally change. So for example, if I just want to change this blue color to any sort of a color, I can do that as well. This is just one of the ways that you can actually control your template by managing the layers inside that, and then doing that on the other side of your Plant 3D project where you edit the line settings from the P&ID classifications dialog. The P&ID line lists has undergone a complete redesign and a massive improvement that's resulted to the creation of an enhanced P&ID modeler. This new modeler, similar to your Revit P&ID modeler, it's more comprehensive of what you have in your Plant 3D project, showing all your drawings or your P&ID drawings, displaying all those line segments and their associated components like inline components, your nozzles, your end equipment, your start end equipment models, your branches, and also your off-page connectors. Let's jump into the software and see how this looks. For this example, we are using AutoCAD Plant 3D 2024, and we are on the 3D piping workspace, and in our very demo Plant 3D project, we have a new drawing that we just created here, and we are going to use the P&ID line lists from the parts insertion panel. And once I click on that, you'll notice that we have this window that shows up P&ID line lists window dialog that shows how that's how it actually looks like. And then there's this drop down here that you can select the P&ID that you're referencing from. So because of this example, this P&ID or this Plant 3D, this plant project really doesn't have a lot of drawings, but you'll see that if you have a couple of PIDs that you are referencing from, they'll actually show up here. So you'll see that for this example, you'll see that you can just navigate to the line that you want to model. And for this example, I am going to use this one here. So primary line segment, and then click on place. Then once I place this sample line like pipeline like this, I can also select the inline asset, for example, like a valve that's part of this line. And you can see this is actually how it looks like. So placing the item. So when I place the item, this is how it looks. Now, this is how you will leverage the P&ID line list functionality from the 2024 and the previous versions of AutoCAD. So if you can just jump into the AutoCAD 2025, we will see how this has changed and what's the value. And what are the really nice enhancements that you will enjoy once you get to use the new revamped P&ID line list in AutoCAD 2025. Now in Plant 3D 2025, you have a completely redesigned P&ID line list. And once you click on that P&ID line list command, you'll see that it is now replaced by a much more graphical line lists with a small graphical preview of the P&ID that you're working off from. Additionally, you'll notice that your pipelines, groups, and basically there is some specific placement order in place. And just as an example, you'll notice that once I click on, for example, this flanged nozzle, and there's also the zoom function here, I can also invert the background color if I want to maybe have something that look maybe white or black in color. And I can also select the line that I want to place in there. So again, this really is important because you actually have that graphical view of what you want to place in your P&ID. For example, I can have that in, for example, you just have to place it as an example. You'll see that it now shows up the creation of an equipment, and then you can go ahead and add maybe the particular dimensions and all that. So maybe for argument's sake, I'm going to just place a tank here that's just around, say, a meter, and a height of maybe 2. And I'm not going to go through the whole process of adding the, customizing this tank. So I'm just placing it, and just gonna place component, just making sure that I have that, and click on create, place it in my drawing, just do some bit of editing to remove that nozzle. Maybe need to do some small modifications here. This looks really, really small, so I need to increase the diameter. So let me just increase it to about 1000 wide, yeah, and maybe 4 meters high. Hit apply, then okay, and I will need to maybe adjust the size of this equipment, this nozzle, and I want to change my class to be 4-inch, and I also need to change the height. So let me just put the height of, yeah. So I have my tank here, and you can see when I select the properties, you'll see that it now inherits the tag number of the P&I, which is great. So I can proceed and add maybe this line here. So if I just click on place the component, and to just go ahead and repeat that procedure. Change myself. So placing something like this, and then I can go ahead and from the line lists, they add my, just an example here, I'm going to add the local, so you can see here placing the component in the current drawing, and place it in like that. Let's talk about data validation in Plant 3D. So there are two types of validations that you can do in Plant 3D. The first one being that you can run a validation on the model alone, and the other one where you are running a validation on your 3D model in relation to the associated P&ID drawings. So the first one is pretty straightforward because you are simply checking for any disconnections or any property mismatches. And the second type of validation requires that you have an understanding of what kind of discrepancies that are in that P&ID drawing and your 3D model and why that exists. Plant 3D objects and their P&ID counterparts in your projects, they do not share the data, even though they may refer to the same logical objects, you know, and P&ID data and the 3D data is physically separated from the in the project database. And so some of the changes that you make in the P&ID don't automatically reflect in the model. And this is why you need data validation to check for mismatches that exist between a 3D model and the associated P&ID drawing. Let's jump into the software and see how that looks. So jumping into our PID sample project, the drawing is what you're seeing here. And I have a couple of entities that I've added. Of course, it could be something that's a little bit more complex, but I'll just show you how to run a simple validation. And the first step is going through this validation setting by simply right clicking on your project. In the shortcut menu, you'll see validation setting. And then on the window, you will notice that you can run all types of validation. But for starters, we can begin with the size mismatches for our PID objects. And if we want to run any basic AutoCAD objects, any lines or polylines, annotations or blocks, so then I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And then on the validate panel, just make sure that you're on the right workspace, because sometimes when you flip between your PID drawing and your 3D piping environment, you need to make sure that you're working from the right workspace. So you can access the validate button on the home tab, run validation, and it now goes through your project and specifically all the drawings that are related to this project, and it brings up this palette that's called the validation summary. So you can look at each and every error. For instance, I can see that there's a line that is terminating at some point, some basic AutoCAD objects as well, and there's a block reference. There's also an AutoCAD block in here. So let's just I'm just going to assume that I have probably maybe need to erase this one and bring in an equipment which is let me just say this is a dome roof tank, and I want to bring it up here and perhaps maybe give it a tag which is inside, then continue, bring this one in here, run the validation, and you'll see that there are some so the errors continue disappearing, but then I can now go into like the unlabeled annotation now. How do I do that? So let me just go ahead and perhaps maybe assign a tag and an equipment tag. Yes. Yeah, so just an equipment, just go for vessel info tag maybe. Just gonna put something that doesn't look like this, but I can maybe assign another tag. Let me check. Just go for this. Let's see how that looks. Yeah. Inside. So I'm gonna run the validation and still see that there's a unlabeled annotation. So it actually tells me that the tag may have been moved away from the associated component. Let me see if I can bring this one down, if it actually fixes it. Press the regeneration tab, generation, run the validation. Let's see, no new validations accepted. So effectively seeing that it's an unlabeled annotation, I can still go ahead and on this action here, I'm going to ignore that because it's not really like an orphaned one. But you can actually see that the action that I've just taken here, where I still have a polyline, as you can see here, I can just go ahead and ignore, or I can also erase that error. Okay, and at the same time, I can go ahead and look at this block reference of under annotations. You can see unlabeled, so I can also yeah, I can still ignore that. Now the other part would be going into the 3D PID versus 3D P&ID versus 3D. In this case, I have a 3D model of my equipment, and I'm actually using the P&ID line lists, as you may have seen in the previous step. And I want to run a validation, maybe some validation of what's on the 3D versus what's on the P&ID. So again, going to the validation settings, I will try to resize this window and then look at what can I actually do here. So let me remove this for now. And let's look at what are some of the things that I can run here. So if I need to have equipment in a model that has more nozzles than it does in the P&ID, yes, I want to check that if there's a model that has equipment that has fewer nozzles, maybe if I need to have items that have the same tag but don't have matching types, perhaps let's just look at each and every one of them just for this example. So click on running the validation, and you'll see that I have a new list of items that I need to look into. So from this drawing, you'll see that I have unmatched inline fittings, which is what this nozzle was not found in the line. You'll see that if there's a pipe mistag, if there's a pipe item type mismatch, and down below it actually gives you some a description of what that is. If I have any item mismatch, you can see it's on a different line. So you can choose to either ignore or unassign it, whichever action that you choose from. So essentially, this makes sure that your P&ID drawing information is consistent with the 3D model. One of the things that I really find very interesting about this is that I intentionally put this tank that has two types of nozzles, that has one excess nozzle. And if you look at, P02, let's look at T01, and it tells me that this equipment has this type of equipment has one more nozzle than the same type of equipment in the P&ID drawing. So it now makes me to take action on the P&ID. Of course, that means I have to look at the P&ID and see if it's actually consistent. So with this, the benefit of this is that running a validation ensures that if you have information in your P&ID, you want to make sure that the 3D model and the associated 3D model is accurate. And using the validation tool in Plant 3D, you can address specific errors, and you will see that overall maintaining data integrity in your project. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and leave your comment with your feedback, or if you have any questions that you may have. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. I hope I'll see you in the next video.